Hello guys, it's Paul with VHScollector.com here to bring you another VHS review, and today we are talking about another SOV film, and this time it is called Blind Faith, and this is a very rare, obscure film from 1989 released by American Entertainment Company, also known as AEC. And let's look at the cover here. We got a pair of hands bound and bloodied, and they're hanging from what appears to be handcuffs on a chain. So it looks like it might be some sort of abduction, rape, torture type film, right? Now let's look at the back here. We got those two images there of a woman bound and hanging, or at least her hands are hanging, and this weird grotesque image with a zombie-like person grabbing at this guy's neck. So let's see what the synopsis says. Blind Faith led innocent victims to their death at the hands of mass murderer Ted Partridge. Blind Faith allowed Sandy, a young runaway, to trust and care for Ted Partridge, trust him until he subjected her and a score of other women to brutality and violence beyond imagination. Now she will have her revenge. Blind Faith moved Cliff Cole, a slow-witted drifter, to torture and kill for Ted Partridge. Under interrogation, Cole will reveal the atrocities he committed for the man who cared for him as a son. Now it is up to Detective William Lindsay and psychologist Richard Stroud to unravel the bizarre and gruesome details. Blind Faith will drive one man to the edge of insanity. And that's a synopsis, and it pretty much sums up the movie. It's probably not as exciting as the synopsis on the back sounds, but there's a few other things on the back here. It says that it's a thriller. Of course, video stores with a cover like this and talk about serial killers and some weird zombie creature on the back would classify this as a horror film, and of course 112 Video certainly does. I think it is a thriller. It's a psychological thriller, but there are parts of the movie which are pretty graphic, which we'll get into in a moment. Now, as I said, this is a very obscure film. If you go on IMDb, it has no user reviews and only 12 user votes. So this is a pretty obscure flick. Now, there's a synopsis for this movie, and the synopsis on the page was actually written by the director, Dean Wilson, of this movie, so it was so obscure that it didn't even have a synopsis. There's also some trivia on there on this movie, which states that the idea for the movie came from a real-life case with a sexual serial killer or sexual sadist or something to that nature, and also it was inspired by a phone call between the director and Tom Savini. Interesting little trivia there, but most people probably haven't heard of this movie. It begins with this detective meeting a hooker in a hotel, and she threatens to cut off his penis in revenge, and he says, "I'll teach you a lesson," and he starts raping her, but then you find out that it's all part of this role-playing scheme. This slightly plays into later into the movie, but not by a whole lot. And then we go to another location, which is the psychologist's house, and we meet his family. His family's having a dispute. His daughter runs away. Then we cut to, I believe, the interrogation room. Now, in the first interrogation sequence, we speak to Sandy, which was a victim of Ted Partridge, a serial killer, and pretty much they're just fishing for different information. She's very slick and sly with her comments.
Sure you don't want something to drink?
Your menu don't excite me.
Sorry. You drink a lot?
I ain't no alky.
We don't really get to see a whole lot, except for flashbacks. Now, these flashbacks are very short and brief, but they're pretty dark and morbid and sometimes pretty gory and gruesome. But most of this movie, like I said, is inside this interrogation room, so we really don't get outside this room. Now, because this movie does rely a whole lot on dialogue, these characters or these actors have to be pretty top-notch at acting. Of course they're not. This is only an SOV film, and most of the people, nearly all the people in this movie, had only been in one film, Blind Faith. But you could certainly tell that they put a lot of effort into it. They at least tried their best. So once they're finished interrogating Sandy, they go on to interrogate the serial killer's sidekick, whose name is Cole, or at least his last name is Cole. And we think that maybe the serial killer took advantage of this slightly retarded guy to do his bidding, do his dirty work of killing some of the women and everything. But we find out that although this guy is a little bit slow, he does have a dark side and probably did beat a few prostitutes. At least Sandy had told the police in her interview that this guy would snap whenever anyone would call him by a nickname, which was Pop.
Pop! Stop!
Then they bring in the serial killer for an interview. They finally nab him, and they have him there in the interrogation room. He would nab people off the street, steal their disability checks, and then torture them and murder them and keep them in the basement of this bogus church that he created. He would also have some sex orgies and all kinds of weird, wacky things would go on there. But that's pretty much what we find out. Those scenes are really interesting, but otherwise, the majority of the movie is just in this interrogation room. Eventually, one of the detectives gets fed up with this guy and starts a fight with him in there because, I don't know, this is where the movie gets a little bit confusing. There seems to be some kind of weird link that maybe I'm not getting between the serial killer and the detective, and I think the link is supposed to be that the serial killer is killing people and that the detective is into S&M and somehow there's a connection. I don't understand. But once they finish the interview with the serial killer, Ted Partridge, they go to the church where he would lure all his victims and have sex orgies and do torture and all these things. And the big question was, where did he hide these 4 bodies? Now, Ted told the detective that bodies are too big to hide or something to that nature. So the detective goes walking through the house with the psychologist, looking for these bodies, and then he starts to go a little nuts in the head. I don't really understand what's happening in his head. I mean, I don't think the movie explains this very well. The dialogue isn't very clear in this movie. I feel like the music's a little too loud, so maybe I missed something that was important. But eventually, he starts to go insane looking for these 4 bodies, and then he goes to the refrigerator, finds the bodies. One of them looks like they're the daughter of the psychologist, pretty much her upper torso, and then he starts laughing crazy and then says,
"They were too big to hide."
And then the movie cuts. So it almost makes you think that maybe this detective had something to do with the murders. But if that was the case, wouldn't Ted Partridge say that in the interrogation room? There's something weird that I'm not getting with this movie. But yeah, that's how it ends. I don't want to say it's a boring movie. It's interesting to watch these nobody actors who have very little talent try their best to pull off a dialogue-driven performance. I think it's the morbid curiosity in me that just kept me watching this movie and kept me just interested in what they were going to say next. So overall, I might consider this a horror film. It does mostly take place in the interrogation room, but those quick instances of gory mayhem and these weird zombie figures which aren't even explained, I don't know where those flashbacks come from. In fact, there's actually a flashback of Ted Partridge getting killed by this weird zombie creature as if Sandy turned into a zombie. It's really bizarre. I can't really make a whole lot of sense of it. But those aspects certainly are horrific and might make this a horror film if there were a lot more of that. But if you're someone interested in SOV, it's definitely worth seeking out. I mean, it's very charming in the way that a lot of these nobody actors try their best to pull off these performances. And I think I might have mentioned already is that the lighting for this movie is pretty top notch, and I'm sure that if this was shot on film it'd look pretty slick. The editing and cinematography are all pretty top notch. It's a pretty well constructed SOV film. So as far as SOV films go, this definitely ranks up there. So this has been Paul with another VHS review, and look out for more, and I'll see you guys next time.